Hey, life can change in an instant. One minute everything feels normal, and the next someone else's mistake turns your world upside down. That's when you need a team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful deaths, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here's something we love. They're a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they care about this community and the people who call it home. So if you've been hurt or someone you care about has, pick up the phone. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. That's WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Wise, the app for international people using money around the globe. With Wise, you can send, spend, and receive up to 40 currencies and save up to 55% compared to major banks. Plus, Wise won't add hidden fees to your transfer. Whether you're buying souvenirs with pesos in Puerto Vallarta or spending euros to tip your Colosseum tour guide, you know you're getting a fair exchange rate with no extra markups. Join the 15 million customers who choose Wise. Download the Wise app today or visit wise.com/US/compare to learn more. Terms and conditions apply. Today on CityCast DC. New reporting from the Washington Post and the New York Times has described a police department in D.C. that is very much still collaborating with ICE. The Washington Post reviewed videos of at least half a dozen incidents since September that show that collaboration. And now I've got Washington Post reporter Teo Armus here to talk through ICE and MPD enforcement in D.C. and what the future looks like. Today's Tuesday, October 7th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, so you recently reported that ICE is still working with MPD, even though the 30-day period that required them to be coordinating is officially over. What exactly is going on here?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And, to be totally honest, I think that's something that we still don't really have a ton of clarity on. But essentially, there's a number of incidents that we, received video footage of or photos of, talked to eyewitnesses about, in which DC police apprehend someone, and then that person that ends up being apprehended, or in some cases, a passenger in a car that gets stopped for something like, not having license plates or faulty license plates, then ends up in ICE custody. And that's through a number of different mechanisms. What we have found and what we have documented is that sort of across the board, Homeland Security officials, federal immigration enforcement officials are basically, passing off. You could say in some instances, federal immigration enforcement officials are basically taking custody of people who initially are apprehended by DC police. They are joining DC police patrols. They are showing up at DC police roll call. And so it's showing that a lot of the collaboration that we, initially saw during that 30-day crime emergency declared by Trump is very much continuing in spite of a district law that either in spirit or in actual word of the law bans stuff like this from happening.
Other than this being an official on-the-books policy, it sounds like much has not changed since that 30-day period expired.
Not really. I think there is an open question among a lot of people who track this stuff pretty closely about the pace and volume of ICE arrests, I would say. Anecdotally, I've heard from groups like Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid that while certainly tons of folks are still being detained and arrested by ICE and taken to detention centers, it's not quite at the same intense pace we saw, particularly in late August, when it felt like every day I would wake up and hear about 3 or 4 different incidents, particularly sort of in Columbia Heights or Ward 1. But absent that, yeah, the tactics certainly seem like they are rather similar.
How can you put some numbers behind that? How many ICE arrests have we seen since the federal takeover, and what is it looking like now?
the latest numbers we have, which are probably a little bit out of date at this point, there have been, I think, over 1,200 immigrants who've been arrested in DC since Trump's crackdown officially started. That is, of course, a really sharp uptick from what we saw in DC prior to that. Just the sort of the first 29 days of the crackdown, we saw more than twice the number of people arrested in DC compared to the first 6 months of Trump's presidency. So it really shot up very, very dramatically. In terms of, whether those are folks who were sort of initially arrested because of some other kind of criminal allegation and then ended up in ICE, and then from there ended up in ICE detention, or whether they were people who were basically just detained for, being in the U.S. illegally, like not having legal status or documentation, is unclear. And that's something that, the White House and other folks who've sort of provided this data have not been like super transparent on, I would say.
So it sounds like you collected all this data that suggested that MPD and ICE were still working together, even though on the record, it seems like their official policy is that they have stopped working together. You talked to the mayor's office and said, they said no on the record coordination was happening. How did they respond to these allegations and this evidence otherwise?
Yeah. So, first off, I should say full credit goes to my colleagues, Emma Uber and Megan Flynn here, who, were really the ones in touch with the mayor's office on this front. But initially, when we went to Mayor Bowser's office, or rather, when one of them approached Mayor Bowser at a press conference, she basically said flat out, ICE is not patrolling with MPD, and then we showed them this video, right, that very clearly sort of points to the fact that something else is perhaps going on. And then the mayor's office completely changed its tune, and basically did in fact acknowledge that DC police have in fact been patrolling with federal immigration enforcement officials. And they put out a statement saying, that DC never wanted, or the DC government never wanted MPD to patrol with agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, but that they're part of this task force that Trump convened under the 30-day crime emergency, and that they wanted that to change. But again, it was something that, at least based on what Mayor Bowser was saying at this press conference, either she was not aware of or was sort of claiming to not be aware of until we took the evidence to her directly.
Do you have a sense of whether or not this is something where perhaps top brass in the mayor's administration don't actually know that ICE and MPD are still coordinating? Or do you have a sense of this, we're being deliberately misled? They know it and they're just trying to obscure that fact?
So that's a great question for, the mayor's office. Based on everything that we've gotten at this point, there's certainly no proof that there's something, at least at the top levels of DC government, being like deliberately hidden or sort of deliberately blocked from public view. But if there's anyone listening to this, that has evidence to the contrary, I certainly would love to see it. But it's hard to say, right? At this point, there are no real signs of that. And, all we can do is basically look at the, accounts we have from witnesses and bystanders, the videos that we have of some of these incidents, and then also the police reports as well. Some of which, I will note, are very particular in terms of what they include and what they exclude. But it's hard to say if that's something that is coming from the top or is, simply something that an officer, like a lower level officer on patrol excluded or included in some shape or form.
Hey, don't miss the Folger Theater's Julius X, playing now through October 26th at the Folger Shakespeare Library. This bold new play by Peabody Award-winning journalist Al Letson remixes Shakespeare's Julius Caesar with the history of Malcolm X, sampling lyrically and historically from Shakespeare's text, from famous speeches by civil rights leaders, and from Letson's own verse. Called Urgent and Timeless by the Washington Lobbyist, Julius X explores the cyclical nature of societal strife, as well as the shared human experiences of ambition, betrayal, and brotherhood. Tickets start at $20 and can be purchased online at folger.edu or by calling the box office at 202-544-7077. Tuesday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Get yours today. CityCast DC is made possible by the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University, presenting the Peabody Performance Series, a full season of free concerts at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center located at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue. The Peabody Performance Series brings the artistry and innovation of one of the nation's leading conservatories to the heart of Washington, D.C. With concerts and programs spanning jazz, classical, chamber music, opera, and dance, the series showcases Peabody's world-class faculty, accomplished students, distinguished alumni, and renowned guest artists. Each event invites audiences to react, reflect, and recharge through the arts while sparking dialogue on the role of performance in civic life. This fall, the series opens October 3rd with the Peabody Camerata in a program of powerful choral and chamber music. On October 8th, Peabody musicians provide live music for the film screening of the Academy Award-winning Netflix documentary The Only Girl in the Orchestra. Peabody Graduate Jazz Ensemble performs original works and new arrangements on October 31st. And on November 14th, the first Slang Lecture explores American roots music, led by distinguished visiting faculty artist Darren Atwater. While all the events are free, tickets are required for entry. The full performance schedule and ticket information is at washingtondc.jhu.edu.
Is there some sense here that maybe MPD needs to say they are coordinating it? Like, you know, we know the Trump administration is pretty tricky. When the mayor announced that MPD and ICE would not be coordinating, Trump did not like that. Is there a sense here that maybe that's why they're being so cagey, that they're trying to both placate Trump and go along with the DC law?
You know, DC here very much is politically, I think, it's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in a lot of ways. I will sort of remind everyone that if you kind of rewind the clock way back to, I think it was the second or third week of August, you know, when Trump sort of first announced this 30-day crime emergency, it was Chief Smith, you know, the head of the DC police force, who put out this order basically saying we will allow DC police officers to communicate and collaborate with ICE officials or immigration enforcement officials in this very narrow window. There's still, you know, were all these other sorts of restrictions that have been in place and sort of have been codified by something called the Sanctuary Amendment, or excuse me, the Sanctuary Values Amendment Act, which was passed in 2020. But you know, that came out, I think, on a Thursday morning. And basically by that evening, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, you know, this is ridiculous. You know, it's crazy that DC would prevent any kind of communication whatsoever. DC should have to collaborate with immigration enforcement on all fronts. And that, of course, you know, is when, again, Trump took over the DC police office. I believe that there was sort of a lawsuit about that policy from the DC Attorney General's office that had been snaking through. But, you know, it's tricky, right? Residents on one hand expect one thing. I mean, this is a very blue city, you know, where a lot of people do not want to see any sort of collaboration with ICE. I think that was very clear. And a lot of these kind of protests and direct actions that have been happening in neighborhoods like Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant. But on the other hand, there is political pressure to help advance the administration's agenda from the administration. And, you know, of course, DC is not a state, you know, and the White House certainly has some leeway to meddle if it would like to do so.
Where's Pamela Smith in all this, the head of MPD? Because I have, from the very beginning, I feel we have really not heard a ton from her.
That's a really good question. I mean, I will say, you know, the bulk of sort of the statements that we received on this front were, you know, not necessarily from her, but from the mayor's office and then sort of from MPD's like spokespeople, essentially. But that was a really big question, I think, during the 30-day crime emergency, right? When the Trump administration appointed the acting head of the DEA to sort of basically oversee the DC police force on this kind of temporary basis. And I think, you know, based on reporting from my colleagues, it was really unclear to a lot of people in the DC police force itself, you know, who they reported to, you know, and I think that's still a really big question here to some degree, right? Is how much of a say she has over this stuff, how much of a say she doesn't have. I mean, is this something that, you know, like Mayor Bowser, she was sort of says she was not aware of, or something that, you know, she has in fact ordered, or maybe something in the gray in between. I don't know.
For years, DC has been told that outdated, tough-on-crime ideas are the only way to address crime in the district. But what residents want and need is investment in real, effective solutions that stop violence before it happens. 70% of DC residents believe the best way to keep our communities safe is to invest more in prevention and increase funding for programs such as affordable housing, job training, and drug and mental health treatment. These are not hypothetical solutions. They already exist. Programs like community violence intervention, housing first approaches, trauma-informed care, and mentorship programs help break cycles of violence today. It's time to invest in what actually works. Connect people to solutions before violence occurs. Create opportunities instead of prison cells. Build real partnerships that prevent crime. The district doesn't need the National Guard to keep us safe any more than we need more prosecutors, police, or prison beds. If we're going to talk about public safety in DC, let's talk about what we know really makes us safe. Go to realsafetydc.org to learn more. So there was this incident that happened at a bilingual school, kind of that became an inflection point for all of this. Can you walk us through what exactly happened there?
Yeah, so we got this video that was filmed on September 25th outside DC Bilingual Public Charter School, which is sort of in Upper Northwest. It's right around dismissal time. So a police report of this incident shows, that basically what had happened is that there was a traffic stop for a car that was missing a rear license plate. The police report says that the driver didn't have a valid driver's license and he was arrested. And the police report also mentions that there's a passenger in this car that was stopped as well, and that passenger was released. It doesn't say anything else about that passenger. But when you look at the video that we obtained of this incident, and even talking to some sort of eyewitnesses and bystanders, the video very clearly shows a DC police officer releasing a man who's wearing this neon yellow construction jacket from handcuffs, so taking handcuffs off this guy's wrists, and then passing him with his wrists still held behind his back to a man who's wearing a mask and has a Homeland Security uniform on, and then who immediately handcuffs that man again. We reached out to DHS about this. They identified, the man who was sort of basically being shuttled from one law enforcement agency to the other as Michael Salas Araujo, who's a national from a Venezuelan national. And, last we checked, he is still in ICE detention. He's still in ICE custody. We've tried to, reach out to his family members and we're unable to do so. But when you kind of combine the video and sort of juxtapose that with the police report, it certainly raises a lot of questions. The police report basically acted as if nothing happened to this guy when, very clearly DC police basically passed him off to if not ICE, then certainly someone from some other Homeland Security agency.
Yeah. The word released is doing a lot of, we'll say, heavy lifting in that statement from MPD that this man was released just into another kind of enforcement and put into an unmarked van.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I use release there because that's the language that's in the police report. But, I think the video speaks for itself. And I would certainly encourage people to go watch, the video in this article on our website, right? That someone is basically being handed over with his hands, still sort of held together behind his back, again, from one law enforcement official to another. Whether or not that is release is up to, I guess, the person viewing it to decide. But certainly, I think the way in which one would think that would result based on the police report is probably not the way in which it was carried out on video.
And it goes back to something that you said the last time that we spoke about all this, which is that when someone is detained or arrested or taken by immigration officials, it just can be a lot harder to get information about what happens. And I think you used the phrase, it's like a black box that you have to penetrate oftentimes.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, in this case, right, we were lucky enough to have video of what had happened, right? But if you look at the police record, you would have no idea that, that this guy, Mike Ed, would have ended up in ICE detention, right? And we only know his name because that was in a DHS statement, right? There's another instance we talk about in the story, right, where we only really know what happened because we were able to get in touch with the brother of another guy, again, who was out on the street. I think, confused for someone else and then ended up in ICE detention, had no sort of criminal charge or even suspicion of some sort of criminal activity against him, and that was a DC police stop as well. So it's kind of this, if you will, like sort of like a puzzle piece or like a photo negative, right, of all these different things that we're kind of putting against each other to try and figure out like what exactly it was happened, right? And there are very few things in sort of the immigration enforcement world that are publicly accessible public record. One of the very few of them being this locator where you can like search and see if someone is in ICE detention, which is true of Micah and true of this another man, Jose Bonilla, whose story we also sort of get to in the article. But beyond what officials tell us, it's hard to know. And again, I mean, as this shows, certainly given the police report, sometimes what officials tell us is not actually what happened, or not necessarily the most comprehensive account of what happened.
And it goes back to something that you said the last time that we spoke about all this, which is that when someone is detained or arrested or taken by immigration officials, it just can be a lot harder to get information about what happens. And I think you used the phrase, it's like a black box that you have to penetrate oftentimes. And so it sounds like when someone is detained by ICE in this way or immigration officials in this way, it can sometimes just be hard to know what happens next. Where are they? Where are they in the system?
They are both, I believe, in ICE detention facilities in Virginia at this point, last I had checked. That, very well may have changed. I mean, ICE sometimes is prone to like moving people around from one detention center to another. But that is what has happened last I checked. Typically when people in DC are detained by ICE or sort of otherwise end up in ICE custody, they go to this processing facility that's in Chantilly, Northern Virginia. We've done some reporting on that. That facility has, particularly during sort of the height of the surge in August, was just completely packed with people. It's really only supposed to hold people for about, I think, 12 hours. Like, people aren't really supposed to stay overnight there, but people had been staying there for days and days and days. And then from there, there's now, it used to be 2, now 3 detention facilities in Virginia that tend to be sort of stop number 2 when folks are, again, arrested in the district.
Did you speak to MPD or the mayor's office about that incident?
Well, so the one incident, in particular, the one outside DC Bilingual is very much one where, we sent the video to the mayor's office, right, and said, hey, this is something that is happening. And I think that's one of the things that ultimately prompted the mayor's office to change its tune, right, and to, initially acknowledge the fact that this is happening to begin with, right? I mean, again, Mayor Bowser said initially, that she was aware of what's happening on the ground and that ICE is not patrolling with MPD, and told us to ask federal immigration officials, said that MPD is not giving the federal government anybody. But the following day, once, their office had time to review the police report and videos and DJ statements about all of this, that's when, there was an acknowledgement that something actually is happening, right? And that kind of collaboration, that cooperation is happening. I should also note, we've heard from a number of folks that inside the DC Police Department that Homeland Security officials are very much still joining MPD officers on their patrols and then also attending DC Police roll call. So they're very much sort of embedded within the way that the police department is working and operating these days.
So what do you see as the future of the way that ICE and MPD coordinate here in DC?
Well, so that's a really good question. And I think that's something that we've been trying to figure out. Certainly if you talk to a lot of activists and I think people who follow this stuff really closely, it would seem right now like arrests are very much still happening. They're down probably a little bit from the very kind of peak of the surge in sort of early September, late August, when, I certainly felt like I would wake up every day and there'd be like 3 or 4 reports of some very highly visible arrest happening somewhere in a neighborhood like Columbia Heights or Mount Pleasant. These days, there do seem to be arrests that are still happening, maybe not quite at the same pace. But, I think, it's hard to know exactly what will happen, but I would not be surprised if those sorts of things continue, right? Very clearly they've been happening a bunch over the last couple of weeks as these incidents show. And I would be pretty surprised if ICE and other sort of Homeland Security offices don't attempt to keep that up, even if it's not at the quite the same rhythm as it was earlier.
Well, Teo, we appreciate you being here and breaking down all of it and keeping an eye on it for us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And our fall member drive is now over. Thank you all so much. I wanted to thank all of our new CityCast DC neighbors, Jennifer Yu, Bree, Caroline A.G., Aaron S., Kate D., Josh I., Veronica N., Molly F., Katie K., and Marie P. You all are the best. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and welcome to the club. That is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.